Daily news and analysis. We keep you informed and inspired.
This is World Today.
Hello and welcome to World Today. I'm Ding Hen in Beijing. Coming up, China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi calls on China and India to cherish the improvement in their bilateral ties. China unveils new measures to stabilize and improve foreign investment. A new poll shows that a clear majority of Australians see China more as an economic partner. Espriella is set to become Colombia's new president, marking a return to power for the country's right wing. To listen to this episode again or to catch up on previous episodes, you can download our podcast by searching World Today. First up, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi says China-India ties have gradually emerged from a low point and returned to a track of recovery and improvement. He made remarks in a meeting with Indian National Security Advisor Ajit Doval in New Delhi. Wang Yi called on China and India to not only view bilateral ties from a long-term perspective, but also promote cooperation from a global perspective. He said the two sides should promote development and revitalization through cooperation and accelerate the modernization process of the global south. The senior Chinese diplomat is in India to attend a meeting of the BRICS National Security Advisors. So for more, joining us now on the line is Gao Xirui, political science PhD candidate at the University of Hong Kong. So thank you very much for joining us, Xirui.
Thank you.
So, according to the Indian side, this bilateral meeting between Chinese and Indian officials is constructive and forward-looking. Do you think that was the case?
Yes. So, as we can tell from the joint press declarations of China and India today, as well as we can look at several past meetings, it's quite constructive and also forward-looking. For comparison, we can look at the meeting in August 2025, as well as exactly 365 days ago, the June 23rd, 2025. So there were also two meetings between Minister Wang Yi and Advisor Doval. There were some nuance and new differences. So, for example, Wang Yi called that we should now move away from the low point of the bilateral ties. Also, the meetings between the two leaders of the two countries are the engines of revitalization of our bilateral ties. So, the whole wording is quite constructive and forward-looking. What's more, we have also touched on some more new issue topics as well as more specific domains. So, for example, we have for the first time mentioned that the rise of the whole global south countries, as well as that we support for India to join the BRICS, as well as India also have some encouraging announcements, such as they support China's core interest on Taiwan issues, for example. Therefore, it is quite constructive as well as forward-looking because both sides are emphasizing some core interests of each other. Besides, China and India have worked out on some very feasible and specific domains to work out, which is quite forward-looking.
During this meeting, both sides mentioned that the leaders of the two countries have agreed that China and India are partners rather than competitors. How do you rate the strategic importance of this consensus?
Yes. So I think this strategic importance is quite crucial, and this consensus is quite rare, especially in terms of the international system nowadays, because, the world system is changing drastically, and there were a lot of wars and conflicts happening. So with this strategic importance that two countries should be partners rather than competitors, it actually increased the stability of the world system as well as the stability in the Asian Pacific region. So both China and India have long emphasized a peaceful rise And for China, this primary strategic direction is actually not towards India. And for India, China should not become a threat, but a partner, because we can have a lot of cooperations on terms of trade and also other industrial areas. Therefore, China and India have not been looking towards each other, but both looking to the West, actually, despite have been neighbors for thousands of years. For example, India has been has been watching to the United States and some Western countries to try to catch up. And China has also been communicating with the United States, Europe, and many other countries since the reform opened up. However, the communication between China and India is actually quite rare. But with this consensus that two countries are partners rather than competitors, it's so important such that we will not be compete with each other on industries as well as many other strategic important questions, but rather we should try to cooperate with each other, for example, on finance, on law enforcement, on trade, and many others, despite that we have some disagreements on border issues, but we will place them in the right place.
Yeah. In terms of the normalization of China-India ties from a low point, in what aspects do you think we need to see further progress?
Yes, fortunately, we have the bilateral ties have now moved away from a low point, and I think there are many areas that we can work on. For example, Minister Wang Yi have emphasized several key domains, such as in his announcement facilitating bilateral dialogue mechanisms, which is for of course, the dialogue over the border issue, and as well as promoting communication in trade, finance, law enforcement, media, and other domains. This is a new claim, so that it's quite nice to see two countries have already worked out on some specific domains. So I think we will quite soon see further progress in trade, finance, law enforcement, media, and maybe some other domains. These are all extremely important domains in which China and India can cooperate and get some fruit. Another crucial aspect Minister Wang Yi raises is actually to actively guide all sectors of society to form a correct understanding and build a solid public opinion and social foundation for improving relations between the two countries. Because public opinion is increasingly important nowadays for all countries and can sometimes, constrain policymakers. So I think this is for the first time that two countries can sit together and work together to try to build solid social foundation and public opinion, and which will be more friendlier, reasonable, and would be easier for us to settle the disagreements we have.
Okay. So, the Chinese foreign minister has also voiced Beijing's support for India in terms of fulfilling India's responsibility as BRICS chair. How do you think support from Beijing is going to make a difference for the Indian side as the rotating chair? We know officially, of course, both China and India are emphasizing working together to empower the global south. There is no doubt about that. However, some observers say the two countries are actually, vying for influence or vying for leadership in the global south. What is your thought in this regard?
This is a very interesting question. Actually, if we date back to the 1950s, there have been some doubts that whether China and India would compete for, reputation or leadership in the global south and third world, or even the non-alliance movement. But what we can see from the history is that actually two countries work quite well, and both countries have been regarded as leaders as well as build a good reputation for leading the third world, the developing countries, as well as the non-alliance movement, and for building a stability across Asia. So what we can learn from history is that actually these kind of problems is not zero sum, meaning that, China as a leader of the BRICS or the global south does not eliminate India's reputation for that. and vice versa. India becoming a leader of the BRICS or chair of the BRICS, and for the next few years, as well as become a leading country in the global south, does not deny China's reputation in the global south. Therefore, I think it's extremely important for two countries, especially maybe India, to view these problems as non-zero sum, as both countries can work together and share the credit. And that's how I think it would help solving the problem. And of course, China has been very generously to support India, and which is quite important. And this kind of harmonious move, I think, will collectively strengthen this reputation of two countries.
Recently, we have seen some tensions rising between the United States and India over the killing of 3 Indian sailors by U.S. forces off the coast of Oman. The U.S. once pursued a partnership with India with an aim to counter China, so to speak. Now, has Washington basically abandoned that strategic thinking?
I think this is quite interesting. So, from the outcome, we can see is that maybe the U.S. India alliance now is problematic. And from the Washington perspective, probably the U.S. would believe that the cost is higher than what it would gain from allying with India in terms of countering China. And now we can see that India has less intense motives to counter China than maybe 1 or 2 years ago, because India and US also have a lot of disagreements. For example, on tariffs, on the Russian oils. For example, the Indian foreign minister, Jai Shankar, has recently accused U.S. of being double standard. For example, that in the past they allowed India to buy Russian oils, and then in another time they tried to accuse India of buying Russian oils. So India has been unsatisfied. What's more, I think on the Indian side, they have started to question whether it is worthwhile to be allying with U.S. at the cost of bilateral ties with China. And from the Indian side, I think New Delhi still wants to hedging between China and U.S. instead of just relying on the United States. And I think the Washington has been basically abandoned its old foreign policy on just aligning with India at all cost, but now they have carefully to think through what they will gain and what they will lose. So I think the rising tension between the US and India is not only over the killing of 3 Indian sailors, but disagreements over a series of issues, not just this time, but also the oil issue, the Hormuz Strait issue, and many other issues.
Thank you very much for joining us. Gao Xirui, political science PhD candidate, joining us from the University of Hong Kong. This is World Today. Stay tuned. You're listening to World Today. I'm Ding Hen in Beijing. China has released an action plan to stabilize and improve the environment for foreign investors. The plan details 15 measures across 5 areas, including broadening market access, streamlining administrative procedures, and enhancing supportive services for foreign invested enterprises. Priority sectors include services, finance, and pharmaceuticals. The plan is also seeking to simplify the processes related to cross-border mergers and acquisitions, data flows, and the reinvestment of profits by foreign companies in China. In addition, it outlines measures to promote the Invest China initiative and fully ensure national treatment for foreign-funded enterprises. For more, my colleague Zhao Yang spoke with Dr. Li Luan, Assistant Professor of Economics from Peking University.
Professor Li Luan, thank you very much for joining us. China has unveiled a new action plan to stabilize and improve foreign investment. So what stands out to you in this package of measures, and what is something new here?
Yeah, so we have seen that the plan lays out 15 measures in 5 areas, including market access, investment facilitation, investment promotion, also service guarantees, and also the foreign investment management. I think the emphasis is not just giving a positive signal, but also solving these obstacles for foreign firms, especially after they have already entered in China. So I think the focus is also shifting from manufacturing to services, as we have seen that China has already removed a lot of foreign investment access restrictions in manufacturing. And the new frontier for China's growth is also in services, including education, healthcare, finance, digital services, and also professional services. So I think several measures are very concrete. For example, there's a major revision of foreign merger and acquisition rules. Also, the guideline creates more scenario-based data export negative list, so basically allowing for more flexible data flow across the border. Also, there's measure to support the reinvestment of foreign firms' profits, encouraging foreign R&Ds, and also supporting these foreign-funded enterprises to list and raise financing in China. So I think the overall goal is to have a pledge of national treatment, so that all the foreign invested enterprises should be treated equally, whether in government procurement, in bidding, in consumption support programs. So basically, this package or this plan is about having a very clear and predictable, also very convenient policy to open the door and also make the companies have more equal treatment.
And how important is foreign investment to China's economy at this stage? What do you make of the role played by foreign investors in the Chinese economy today?
Yeah, so I think foreign investment is not just about accumulation of capital. At China's current development stage, I think the more important contribution of these investment is the technology, the practice of how to manage the company, also in terms of establishing global networks, connecting the R&D and also the talents across the globe, and also access to international markets. So I think, in terms of the current status, the headline foreign direct investment is under a little bit of pressure, but I think the structure is improving. For example, in the first 5 months of 2026, China has established more than 25,000 new foreign invested enterprises, which is a 5.3% increase year on year. So the foreign firms, I think, they're also a good, addition to China's domestic market because they bring more competition. Also, they bring their higher product standards, also in terms of their compliance and also the experience in their global supply chain management. I think this is going to be especially valuable when China wants to move from these, large-scale, low-cost business model to a quality-based growth.
Mm-hmm. And the plan highlights further opening in services sector, financial industry, and pharmaceutical sectors. So why are these sectors chosen?
Yeah, so I think services are the natural next target of this opening because, as I mentioned, manufacturing is already pretty highly open to foreign capital, but services is still more regulated and also more locally concentrated. Since services have now contributed for over 60% of our GDP, I think opening this sector basically will have a large impact on our consumption, employment, and also overall productivity. I think, for example, as you mentioned, finance, pharmaceuticals are some of the more important areas and sectors because, for example, foreign investors, why do they need to pay attention to finance? Because they need better tools to manage their risk, also to raise their fund, also, to conduct investment advisory services or, to have basically all the required funneling and infrastructure to make further investment. And I think in terms of pharmaceuticals, healthcare, they're also very important because, with China's aging demographics, I think this healthcare market is going to become larger and larger in the future. So there's going to be a lot of potential in this time of China's structural transition, basically having more services, more innovation, and also more sophisticated capital market.
And China expanding access for the foreign institutions in financial services. So how attractive is China's financial market for global investors today?
Yeah, I think China's is still pretty attractive because first of its scale and also in terms of diversification, because when the overseas investors are trying to look for destinations, Chinese equities, they offer a very unique combination of different sectors. For example, the green energy and also EV and artificial intelligence, embodied intelligence. So these areas provides a very interesting portfolio, especially for those investors who want to diversify their portfolio. And I think this new plan also improves the market access, for example, supporting these treasury bond futures, also, giving this investment advisory services, or, having more cross-border financing facilitation. These are all good measures to make these, China's financial market more accessible to foreign institutions. Overall, I think, globally speaking, the investors still have a lot of confidence in China's capital market.
And the plan also proposed clear rules for cross-border data flows and data export management. So how significant is this for the foreign businesses operating in China?
Yeah, I think this is probably one of the most important issues for multinational firms, because these foreign companies, they constantly do move data in and out for their human resource, customer service, their R&D, compliance, their supply chain management. So I think this plan directly addressed this issue by supporting some of these free trade zones and also service sector pilot cities to create the more scenario-based and also field-level data export list. So basically, this is a call for a clearer and more predictable standard to help facilitate the movement of data in these sectors. And I think this is also going to reduce some of the uncertainties when it comes to compliance. So basically, the foreign companies will have less to worry about because they know, which sectors and in what scenario is the data is able to flow between the border. And I think the clearer rules can also affect China's functions as part of the multinational company's global operation system.
And the plan also aims to simplify procedures for cross-border mergers and acquisitions. So could this trigger a new wave of foreign investment activity? Which sectors are likely to attract more M&A interest from overseas investors?
Yeah, so my judgment is that it could probably create more high quality merger and acquisition, not necessarily more scale or with the flood of funds coming across border. I think the plan is calling for revision of rules for foreign investors to basically acquiring domestic enterprises. Basically, we want to optimize their merger and acquisition procedures, their payment requirements, and allow these qualified foreign investment institutions to participate as the strategic investors in some of the listed company securities. So I think the timing is very meaningful because our merger and acquisition market is already recovering. I think it has a lot of growth potential in sectors including healthcare, biotech, AI applications, green technology. So I think, but we have to also be aware of the national security and the sensitivity of some of the technology. So I think this is not to say, the floodgate is open, so a lot of the capital can rush in without any care. I think this is a better and clearer and more predictable rules that opens up some of the opportunities for foreign capital.
And China is now making consumption growth a cornerstone of the country's economic strategy. So, Li Lun, what kind of opportunities do you think China's plans to boost consumption might create for foreign investors?
Yes, as we have seen in cases and examples like Tesla, I think allowing some foreign firms to enter the Chinese market could basically bring a lot of stimulus for China's demand, for China's domestic consumption market, for especially to create a more healthy competitive environment. Because as we have known, the competition is not just about prices; they're also about quality, about innovation, about R&D. So I think by designing these very carefully, regulated rules, we want to attract those high quality multinational firms with high investment in R&D. And also the goal is to have the so-called spillover effect, where they could help our domestic sectors also increase in terms of quality, in terms of the level of service. So I think this is potentially going to be an opportunity not only for foreign companies, but also for domestic companies as well.
Dr. Li Lun, Assistant Professor of Economics from Peking University, talking with my colleague Zhao Yang. You're listening to World Today. To listen to this episode again or to catch up on previous episodes, you can download our podcast by searching for World Today. We'll be back after a very short break. You're back with World Today. I'm Ding Hen in Beijing. A senior official from the APEC Secretariat is calling for stronger regional cooperation and more resilient supply chains to help economies navigate rapid technological change and global uncertainty. Eduardo Pedrosa, Executive Director of the APEC Secretariat, is among the speakers at this year's Summer Davos Forum held in the northeastern Chinese city of Dalian. In an interview with my colleague Song Ruixing, Pedrosa says access to reliable, affordable, and sustainable energy is becoming a key competitive advantage as the expansion of AI and data centers are fueling soaring demand for electricity. He also emphasizes greater investment in skills training and lifelong learning.
Mr. Pedrosa, we met in Boao back in March, where we discussed trade, regional cooperation, and the evolving global economy. 3 months later, we are meeting again at Summer Davos Forum here. So, what issues are at the top of your agenda this time, and what conversations do you expect to see here in Dalian?
Well, I think the conversations are almost the same as those that we had in Boao Forum 3 months ago. Time flies. But really the focus is still on the multilateral trading system and the WTO and the free trade area of the Asia Pacific, artificial intelligence, but also sustainability. And we will be back here in Dalian for the third senior officials meeting in middle of August. But this time around, it should be a very interesting opportunity as we had the APEC Trade Ministers meeting in Suzhou. So it was a very interesting set of meetings. But what was most remarkable, I think, or if that's too strong a word, but APEC Trade Ministers really did come together and stress the importance of working together, addressing these issues together, and wondering what can APEC do to improve the global trading system.
Over the past 20 years, you've consulted for governments and businesses across the Asia-Pacific region. From your point of view, how do you see the current global supply chain realignment reshaping the region's industrial landscape?
Well, it's been a long time. You make it sound such a long time, 20 years. But I think what we have realized and need to emphasize again is the need for supply chain resilience. We've seen that over the many, many years. We saw it during the COVID crisis, and that we need to be resilient. We need to have some diversification and reliability. This year, of course, there have been major shocks to regional and global supply chains. So it's forums like this, during APEC meetings, that we really get to have businesses come together with policymakers to see the most efficient ways that we can do this. I think there are problems if we emphasize too much diversification without thinking about what the cost effects are as well. So you need to have this balance between ensuring that we don't take too much risk by placing all of our manufacturing in one single place, but at the same time not creating more and more costs for businesses and consumers.
I've got a set of data which shows that 52% of executives plan to relocate operations to markets with better renewable energy infrastructure within the next 5 years, while 49% plan to relocate supply chains. So, to what extent is access to clean and reliable energy becoming a competitive advantage in attracting investment and manufacturing activity?
Well, we see a lot of changes in the dynamics between parts of the economy. I think we hear more and more about data centers and, of course, artificial intelligence. They rely on a sustainable and constant supply of energy. So that's an important factor to take into account as we look forward to the new digital economy. So definitely we'll be looking at more sustainable and reliable energy sources.
Actually, what strikes me is that many of these challenges, whether supply chains, energy infrastructure, or even investment flows, cannot really be solved by any single economy acting alone.
Now, these are issues that we need to work on together. Again, as we see, there's a certain amount of uncertainty that we face in the global trading system. And this itself impacts investment flows. If we don't have that sense of certainty, it becomes very difficult for businesses to make these very large investments in energy, in infrastructure, and so on.
You've often said that one of the biggest challenges we face is to ensure that the benefits of globalization are widely shared. At a time when supply chains are fragmenting and technology is increasingly shaped by geopolitical competition, what practical steps can APEC take to ensure that innovation creates opportunities or even job opportunities for a broader range of economies, businesses, and workers?
Well, I think it's been proven, and it's very important for us to recognize that a lot of the growth that we've seen over the past 30 or more years it's very important for all of our economies, but we also need to make sure that the benefits are spread out amongst all of our people. And so as far as the business community is concerned, in APEC, we've had a strong focus on micro and small and medium enterprises. And this is really to facilitate their interaction and formalization within the economy and think of policy frameworks that will facilitate that. But at the end of the day, it's businesses that make these decisions. And so we need to make sure that the work we do facilitates business-to-business connections, but also creates that policy environment that brings and allows for businesses to come together. It's not an easy task. Businesses will make those decisions based on profit and loss, but certainly government can play its own role in this. Well, we do look at issues like supply chain facilitation. We look at issues like connectivity, and these are important for us, for businesses, to be able to connect with each other and to remove some of the sort of blockages in supply chains. For example, the lack of digitalization. That's very important to make sure that supply chains and businesses are efficient. And that's really most important for smaller businesses that want to go global. If you think about how supply chains work, the very big companies can afford to deal with all of the regulations and trade rules. They have very large policy groups. Whereas if you have a small company, you're much more focused on doing your business and rather than having a large policy team. There are, of course, people-to-people flows that we have to deal with, but also the infrastructure issues. So we're here in Dalian. It's a port city with a lot of connections, especially on the Northeast Asian side. And there's also a lot of sort of petrochemical and refineries activities here, shipbuilding activities. And that will show some of the relevance of Dalian to the global economy today as we face all of these challenges.
In our previous interview, what's impressed me the most is that you described the development of the Hainan Free Trade Port as crossing the river by filling the stones. That is an approach based on experimentation and gradual adjustment. So if we look at China's energy transition today, do you see a similar or same philosophy at work?
Well, I think China is an economy that's making the fastest transition to renewable energies as a source of, the main source of energy. And if you just walk around the streets, you see how many of the vehicles are EVs, but the electricity itself has to come from somewhere. And of course, China has ambitions on AI and data. We are hoping to get more deliverables, if you like, looking ahead to November. These are energy-intensive technologies, but definitely China has been doing a lot of work on this. I think the largest manufacturer of solar panels, for example, and that is also making its way to the global market as well.
It looks like policy innovation is one thing and workforce transformation is another.
Yeah, absolutely. This is one of those moments in history where you're seeing technology change at an unprecedented pace. We've seen some similar examples, during, for example, the Industrial Revolution, but that itself took time, decades, if you like. The transformations that we're seeing today are more in terms of months. If we think about AI and the speed of AI adoption, we have to adjust to that. And that has its biggest impact on people and the skills that we have. A lot of us aren't native to the digital economy, so we have to learn how to do that. And so that involves continuous education, upskilling, and that's a lot of work that APEC does through its work through the Human Resource Development Group. You'll see that there's a lot of focus on international cooperation, on the kind of education that's needed, sharing of best practices on how we actually implement these policies, whether they're done as microcredits or the mutual recognition of microcredits, and how to facilitate those movements, as well as and generally how to upskill the whole workforce.
That was Eduardo Pedrosa, Executive Director of the APEC Secretariat, talking with my colleague Song Ruixing. You're listening to World Today. I'm Ding Hen in Beijing. A recent opinion poll shows more than half of Australians see China as more of an economic partner than a security threat. 61% of the respondents in a 2026 Lowy Institute poll hold that view, an increase of 11 percentage points from 2025. The Australian think tank says the increase marks one of the largest swings in sentiment in this year's survey. In the meantime, 51% said Australia's relationship with China is more important than its relationship with the United States, an increase of 8 percentage points from last year. The poll was conducted in March this year among more than 2,000 Australian residents aged 18 and above. So for more, joining us now on the line is Dr. Lauren Johnston, senior researcher joining us from Aus-China Institute, a Melbourne-based independent think tank. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Tunghang.
Yeah, so first of all, Lauren, to what extent do you think this change in public opinion in Australia is related to the warming of the broader China-Australia relationship in recent years?
It's definitely one key factor. So the low point in the Australia-China ties, according to this poll, was around 2019, 2020-21, which was a high point for China-Australia trade tensions. A lot of those trade tensions have settled, and I guess disputes are where they arise, they're managed more diplomatically over the recent, 4 years or so. So it definitely does follow a pattern of more diplomatic means of managing ties and the smoother ties that have followed, for sure.
Significant numbers of the respondents in this poll support trading more with China. But when it comes to investment, receiving investment from China, there is, by comparison, a much lower level of support from these respondents in this poll. Lauren, how do you read this? In your opinion, can trade and investment be separated from one another when Australia is dealing with China?
When I saw this question, I thought it was quite... at an accounting level, it could be very basic, which is simply that Australia enjoys a sustained trade surplus with China, but on the investment side, we have a deficit. So if the average Australian sampled in this poll is thinking like an accountant, like deficit surplus, of course they'll be interested in more trade and less interested in investment. So that's the first point. And obviously it is quite difficult to separate the two over time, as investment can itself inspire more trade and can shift trade patterns. And then I think another point on the trade is that it's sort of a bit it's a bit more distant. So it's, it's putting goods on a ship and so on, whereas investment can be more complex. So based on the sort of legal complexity, the economic complexity, it's not that surprising that people are a little more reticent about investment than they are about trade, simply because it's much more complex.
The same poll also shows that Australians have a record low trust in the United States. Why do you think this is the case? Is this in line with your own perception?
I mean, this is definitely the elephant in the China-Australia room. And, the first Donald Trump presidency was a shock for Australian politics. And I guess the second one is a compounding shock. So by the time of this survey, President Trump had been in power for some months already. And I assume, I don't recall the month that the sample was taken, but the survey was done, but there must be some crossover with complexity in Iran and the Middle East and the shock to the global economy presented by this. And Australians have been affected in terms of inflation, in terms of supply chains, and so on, and, pressure on the government. So granted, the tie-in with America in terms of managing that regional complexity and conflict, obviously Australians are in a situation where they're very unsure of their long-standing key security partner, which presents different security scenarios to what Australians have been known it to present for a much longer time. So there is some in the poll, Australians still cite the US as being the key security partner, but there does seem to be much less confidence in the stability of that security partner or in the insurance provided.
Yeah. Another takeaway from this poll is that the Australian respondents in this poll overwhelmingly believe that the United States should prioritize stabilizing ties with China. So, Lauren, the U.S. and China are trying to pursue a constructive relationship of strategic stability. In what ways can this policy intention benefit Australia?
Australia has China as its major economic partner, and as this poll has indicated, a majority of Australians see China as more important to Australia than the US. At the same time, the polls suggest Australians highly regard the security relationship. So if you have tensions between your most important economic and your security partner, obviously that is going to create complexity and tension in policy making. It's very hard to straddle between you when your two key partners are fighting. I think there's that African phrase when two elephants fight, it's the grass that suffers. So I guess Australia's the sort of grass when they're fighting. So from an Australian perspective, it definitely helps if the global economy runs smoothly, global trade runs smoothly, and that really relies upon China and the US getting along. So, of course, naturally, Australia is a winner if China and the US are getting along, and that's a stable relationship.
Thank you very much for your perspective. Dr. Lauren Johnston, senior researcher, joining us from Aus-China Institute, an Australia-based think tank. Thank you very much for joining us. You're listening to World Today. We'll be back.
Hello, I'm Yin Liang, Kramer Chair Professor of Economics at Willamette University. In a rapidly changing world, staying informed has never been more important. World Today delivers sharp analysis, global perspectives, and the stories behind the headlines. It is your trusted source to understand what's shaping our world. World Today, bringing the world closer.
You're listening to World Today. I'm Ding Hen in Beijing. A right-wing millionaire lawyer has defeated a left-wing senator by a thin margin to win Colombia's presidential election. Abelardo de Espriella secured over 49.6% of the votes compared to the 48.7% for his competitor Ivan Cepeda. The margin in the runoff was narrower actually than in the first round a couple of weeks ago. Dara Esprilla's victory is marking a swing back to the right in Colombia after 4 years under a left-leaning president. He has received the endorsement of U.S. President Donald Trump. So for more, joining us now on the line is Dr. Cao Ting, Director of the Center for Latin American Studies with Fudan University. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for the invitation.
So what do we know about Dara Espriella? He has called himself an outsider and an anti-establishment figure. Is that really the case?
Well, he is a Colombian lawyer. As we know, he is a Colombian lawyer, businessman, and a far-right politician. And I think he is not a complete outsider. Because Espriella was a candidate for governor of Córdoba during the 1997 Colombian regional elections, and he is also a close friend of Álvaro Uribe, who was president of Colombia from 2002 to 2010. And before his presidential run, de la Espriella had some wine business, and he is a millionaire. So we know he is a millionaire, but he also has many contacts, communications with the Colombian politicians, and he calls himself a tiger. And he founded the Defenders of the Homeland movement and advocates economic liberalization and admires Milei's fiscal proposals. So we can see that he is an anti-establishment figure, and he opposes abortion, transgender rights, and feminism. And he also takes a hard line on crime, support U.S. military strikes on drug trafficking terrorist camps, and the eradication of coca plantations. And so in this sense, I think he's very similar to Trump. Yeah.
So like you said, he is calling for a very hardline approach, an iron fist approach, to put it this way, against the criminal groups. Actually, it is reported the past year has been the most violent since the 2016 signing of a peace agreement in this country. So do you believe a return to a full-scale military confrontation can curb the violence?
Well, I think the violence in Colombia is not a simple war against a single enemy. The current landscape in Colombia is very fragmented, and the primary driver of the armed groups in Colombia is often economic, not ideological. And we know that the Calderon government in Mexico adopted a military approach to crack down on drug cartels, but the result was further escalation of violent activity. So I think the military measures alone will not resolve this problem. And the government must devise reconstruction plans for these vulnerable areas, and including the creation of the livelihood opportunities for the people who are living there, and help the residents break free from the poverty.
So, by the way, how much has this open endorsement from the U.S. President Donald Trump helped Dara Espriella in this particular election?
Actually, I don't know how much has the endorsement from Trump helped this candidate, because we can see that the election results for the two candidates were quite close.
Yeah.
And I think maybe the campaign strategy of De La Espriella is because he emulated the style of Trump and also his allies in Latin America. For example, Argentine President Milei and Salvador President Bukele. And they all advocate taking a hard line against crime and also support the economic liberalization. And I think these measures are very popular or are received very well in these residents in Colombia.
Upon the news of his election victory, De La Espriella has promised to be the president for all Colombians. Can this promise be taken seriously, in your opinion?
Well, we can see that this time his victory margin was quite small, only less than 1 percentage point, or roughly 250,000 votes. This means that nearly half of all the Colombians did not back De La Espriella. So, and we can see that now the Congress is very fragmented. So to achieve his goals, to accomplish his proposals, he must gain the support from the other political parties. And on the other hand, his policies are not beneficial for everybody in Colombia. For example, he has committed to reduce the public expenditures. And in Argentina, we have seen that Milei has also made the same reform and has caused a lot of challenges for the vulnerable groups. And also, we can see that many public servants have lost their job because of the fiscal reform in Argentina. So I think the reform of the De La Espriella will not be beneficial for everybody in Colombia.
Indeed. Across Latin America, as you mentioned earlier, we're seeing a wave of right-wing candidates sweeping presidential races in Honduras, in Chile, and Colombia is the latest case. What could be the ramifications of this trend? 1 minute.
Well, I think the primary driver of this trend is the public dissatisfaction. And the voters are turning to right-wing outsiders as the punishment vote against the traditional parties and the left wing. So this does not mean that Latin American people all support right-wing. And we can see that now many right-wing governments in the region are likely to align more closely with the United States on political and security measures. They also need to keep the cooperation with China due to the economic considerations. So a fundamental recession of Sino-Latin American relations appears unlikely.
Your point's well taken, but thank you very much for joining us. That was Dr. Cao Ting, Director of the Center for Latin American Studies from Fudan University. That's all the time for this edition of World Today. I'm Ding Han in Beijing. Thank you so much for listening. Bye for now.